Well, good morning. It is so great to be together as a church at all of our different locations. And I have a question for those of you at the warehouse and the fire hall right now. I've got good news and bad news. Which one do you want first? Well, your turn's coming. Just hang on. I just want to hear from these guys first. Okay, interesting. Now your turn. I got good news and bad news. Which one do you want to hear first? Really? You guys are so pessimistic, and unless you just want to get the bad news out of the way. Okay, well, the bad news is this. We've come to the end of Ezekiel. No, why are you cheering? This is the bad news, okay? Because that means that we need to deal with the last 9 chapters. And the last 9 chapters, yes, ouch, the last 9 chapters are said by scholars to be the most difficult chapters in the entire Bible to understand and interpret. That's the bad news. The good news? We've come to the end of Ezekiel. So that's good news that we're finally at the end. It's been quite the journey. For those of you joining us for the very first time, either online live right now or wherever you are, I want to let you know that we're on an audacious journey as a church to read every single chapter of the Bible, a chapter a day for 1,000 days. And we're 382 days in today, so we got a ways to go. But it's been an amazing journey, and as we journey along, it's been rich. But Ezekiel's been difficult because it's a very difficult book. There's a lot of doom and gloom. There's a lot of hope, but there's a lot of tough stuff in Ezekiel as well. And we've come to the very last chapter today. Now, where we're going on from here, we're going to continue our 50 days of intentionality. On Monday morning, we hit the book of Haggai. 2 little chapters, and then we're on to First Timothy, 6 chapters, and then we're on to James, a very, very practical 6 chapters of James, and then we are going to be moving into Exodus March 1st. So if you have not been keeping track, or maybe this is you haven't even started the chapter a day journey, let me just remind you the easiest way to access this journey that we're on, and you can pick it up right on Monday morning. Either start fresh for the very first time on Monday morning, and this is it. Use the app. Go to the app, and when you go to the app, you're going to scroll down and see a little blue icon that says the Bible. You're going to click on the Bible, and that's going to take you to 5 other tools that we have for you, including the daily blog and a sign-up card, as well as a bookmark and a bunch of other stuff. That's one way to access this. The other, and lots of people miss this one, at the bottom of the app is a little button called the Bible. And when you hit that, you get 2 choices. One is the whole Bible you can search, or the chapter a day reading. And when you hit on that chapter a day reading, it's going to take you to the passage for that day. And you can either read that passage, or you can actually listen to it as well while you're driving or getting ready for the day. So these are great ways to connect. And I encourage you, I challenge you, Monday morning, let's start fresh. We're into a brand new book. We're done with Ezekiel. We're on to some new stuff, and it's going to be great. Now, we are 5 weeks into our 50 days of intentionality, and 5 weeks ago, we were reading Ezekiel, and it felt like God was saying, look, I want you to listen to me. There's some stuff in your life that you need to stop. And we said, hey, what is that? Let's identify. What do we need to stop? Specific, let's write it down. What do we need to stop for the next 50 days? Now, and then we also heard, hey, there's some stuff in your life that you need to start. And let's start this and do it for the next 50 days. Now, 5 weeks, that means we're starting to feel the burn, right? The romance is sort of worn off. The excitement of 50 days of intentionality is worn off. Now it's just kind of getting tough for some of us. But not every part of this journey has been tough. Some of the intentionality steps that we've taken have been really life-giving. In fact, we have a number of people over this last month or so that have said, I'm going to get involved intentionally in a small group. And they found their people, and they're doing small group together. Others said, I'm going to take Covenant Community. And we did that course a couple of weeks ago. And a whole pile of people said, you know what? My intentional step is that I'm going to get baptized. And we've been just enjoying listening to their stories so much. In fact, last weekend, 3 people got baptized over at the warehouse. Great stories. We can't go without you hearing their stories. So the first one up this morning is Caswell.
My name is Caswell Lewandowski, and I attend the 1115 at the warehouse. I grew up Catholic. We went to church on the major holidays, and then, every other Sunday or a few Sundays a month or whenever, it kind of convenience us. So religion was always a part, faith was always a part of life. Christ was always there. I met a young lady who later on became my wife, and in dating her and wanting to see the dating through to marriage, I started to attend her church and was introduced to God and Christ in a much more detailed way, and met Christ there. In my time spent in my previous church, there was absolutely moments that you started to feel closer to God and a closer connection to God and Christ. There were certainly moments we've got 4 children. Those definitely are a massive moment in life in shaping my relationship with God. There were good moments, there was bad moments. There was times that you knew there was nothing you can do other than just pray, have faith, and trust. My path to coming to Riverwood was in my previous congregation. I started to feel less at home. I started feeling, very, fairly anxious and was less comfortable. So I started to look around to see what else is out there, nearby for church life, knowing that having a church community was very important. I found the Ascent through Instagram, and then from the Ascent, just loving the atmosphere and the environment and everything that it was, I started coming to Riverwood at the warehouse. I did meet Rhoda and Carl there, and anyone that wants to know what warehouse is like should meet Rhoda, and you'll know. From there, and how I just felt so comfortable here that it felt very much like home, and I love the message every week that welcome home. No matter what's going on in your life, bring it in with you and sit it right next to you, because Christ loves you either way. I really started becoming very intentional, and that's a big word right now around church, but it started to become very intentional that I was setting aside time each day, and I really found myself that if I didn't read the chapter a day or the blog that day, I felt like something was missing from the day. Sitting with my kids, being around my kids, feeling that presence around us, everything started to become more intentional, and it seemed to be I was much more aware of some of those amazing blessings that were happening in the moment. I'm being baptized today because I want to be very intentional as to how I live my life.
And Caswell's over at the warehouse. We celebrate with you, Caswell. Thank you for sharing your story. If the Israelites had that kind of intentionality, to be intentional with their faith and journeying on with their faith and not wanting to sit, still and continuing to move with God, they wouldn't have ended up in the great big mess that they ended up with. Ezekiel, as we've been reading a chapter a day through this last 48 days, Ezekiel was a priest. And he was prophesying in around 600 BC. For 6 years, he was prophesying doom and gloom and warning that Jerusalem was going to fall. And then it did fall in 587 BC to the Babylonians. And then he prophesied for the next 15 years. And this is where the book kind of turned a little bit, because it started to talk about hope. And it started to talk about restoration, as we looked at last weekend, and about the rebuilding of the temple. Now, these last 8 chapters that we read this last week, from 40 to 48, or 9 chapters actually. These last 9 chapters are one big, long prophecy, and it's all about a temple. And it leads us to a question, and the question is this: what makes this prophecy so challenging and difficult? Now, those of you that read it, you know some of the elements of this, and you know some of the detailed reasons, but generally speaking, in a nutshell, the reason this is so difficult to understand, it all boils down to timing. When in the world is this temple, which is a fantastical temple, when is it supposed to be built? Is it allegorical? Is it a parable? Is it real? Is it literal? Where is it? I mean, it doesn't seem like the land of Israel actually can accommodate this temple. So there's a lot of questions that boil around this. Now, we're not going to sidestep Ezekiel today. We're going to dig right in. And in fact, I'm going to introduce you to the beginning of the prophecy. Chapter 40, verses 1 to 5 say this: On April 28th, during the 25th year of our captivity, 14 years after the fall of Jerusalem, the Lord took hold of me. In a vision from God, he took me to the land of Israel and set me down on a very high mountain. From there, I could see towards the south what appeared to be a city. As he brought me near, I saw a man whose face shone like bronze standing beside a gateway entrance. He was holding in his hand a linen measuring cord and a measuring rod. And he said to me, Son of man, watch and listen. Pay close attention to everything I show you. You have been brought here so that I can show you many things. Then you will return to the people of Israel and tell them everything you have seen. I could see a wall completely surrounding the temple area. The man took the measuring rod that was 10.5 feet long and measured the wall, and the wall was 10.5 feet thick and 10.5 feet high. What happens over the next 8 chapters is much like that last verse. It's measurements galore. I mean, it's like a blueprint drawing architect's dream. I mean, it's just, there are so many measurements and details in this. It's an absolute description of measuring its architectural detail, and it continues for 8 chapters, and there's many different ways of interpreting this. Now, if you want to keep track of all this, again, you can go to the Riverwood app. We have a sermon note page there, and I'm going to be giving you lots of detail, lots of fill-in-the-blank opportunities there. But here's what I want to do in high speed. I want to introduce you to the 7 different ways of interpreting these 9 chapters. The most difficult section of the Bible has 7 different ways of interpreting it. Now, here we go. We're going to move fairly quickly. Interpretation number 1, this is actually a description of Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple was the first temple built by David's son Solomon. And some people say, well, this is obviously just a description of that temple. We don't have that temple. We haven't seen that temple. We don't know exactly what it was like. Not a great interpretation, because we have lots of information in Kings and Chronicles about that temple, and there's too many contradictory details here. So this really isn't a great interpretation. Interpretation number 2. This is a description of the temple to be built 70 years from now into the future, when the people return from exile and they're coming back and the Babylonians have destroyed Solomon's temple. They need to build another temple. So this is the blueprint, some people say, for that temple. Now, we have a problem with this. One is the topography of the land. And when you read through this prophecy, the topography is all off. I mean, it is not like Israel today or Israel back then. It would have to have seismic earthquakes and volcanoes to rearrange the topography in order to match this prophecy. So that's one reason that this doesn't seem like a great interpretation. The other is that there's a river coming out of the top of the temple, and it flows down. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it flows down into the Dead Sea, where the Dead Sea comes to life. Well, there is no such river, and the Dead Sea is very dead today. So how is this that this is actually intended as the prophecy or the blueprint for the second temple? Not a great interpretation. Interpretation number 3, this is a spiritual description of the redeemed from all ages worshiping God in heaven. So this interpretation says what we're reading in these 9 chapters is actually a picture of what's going to happen in heaven, in spiritual realms, when everybody that are believers in God come together and worship Him. There's some problems with this. One of the problems is all the detailed measurements seem to indicate that this is a real, solid, viable, earthly, sort of tangible temple. So why do we have all these measurements? If this is a bit more of a mystical, spiritual temple, why do we have all these solid measurements? And then there's this the instructions in this prophecy about animal sacrifice. What in the world are animal sacrifices doing in heaven? So that sort of makes this not a great interpretation. Interpretation number 4, this is an allegorical description of the church age and Christ in the church. So this interpretation says that this is actually a picture of us. A picture of what happened after Christ ascended to heaven. And this is a picture, this prophecy, 9 chapters, is a picture of what we're going to experience. The problem with this is that there's way too many parts of this prophecy that don't parallel our experience with Christ at all. And what in the world would the people of Babylon that were exiled there, what would they care about the church age? Interpretation number 5, you're doing great. You're sticking with me. Here we go. The description is a prophetic parable. Some people say, you know what, it's just a story. It's a prophetic parable, kind of, again, about the church age or our relationship with God. Part of the problem here is the ridiculous number of measurements and how literal it would seem to be an actual blueprint, why would you include all that in a parable? There'd be much more inspiring and much shorter ways of telling a story if this was intended as a parable. Interpretation number 6, you're doing great, just 2 more. This is a description of the millennial temple built at Christ's second coming to last 1,000 years. Now, this view says part of it is that the prince, you remember the prince in the prophecy is Christ. There's only one problem with that. If the prince, to make this all work into the millennial temple, is Christ, there's a verse in this prophecy that says this prince is going to offer up animal sacrifices for the sins of the people and for his own sins. That doesn't seem to work because Jesus didn't sin. So that doesn't seem to work. It kind of falls apart there. Plus, again, what are the animal sacrifices doing at the second coming of Christ? And the last interpretation is that this is a description of a literal third temple that is going to be built. So if you travel with us to Israel, we're going to go to the Old City, and we probably are going to walk past the Temple Institute. It's in the Old City of Jerusalem. And the Temple Institute is a group of Orthodox Jews today that have raised $100,000 to draw the blueprints of a temple, a third temple that they believe is going to sit on top of the Dome of the Rock area, which was their original temple area. They've already made all of the priest robes. They've already created all of the furniture and all of the instruments that are going to be used in that third temple. You can imagine the tension that this brings in Israel. You can kind of feel it when you're there sometimes because these people are very, very intent on building this third temple, according to Ezekiel's drawings, on the Temple Mount where the Dome of the Rock is right now. Problem with this one is it's a very Jewish view that has nothing to do with Jesus or the New Testament. All right, you can breathe now. So which is the right interpretation? You got 7 of them. Which is the right one? Well, I don't have a hot clue. All I know is that this stuff gives me a theological headache. When I look at this, I don't know which one is true. And I don't even think that it would be particularly helpful to us today for us to guess or speculate or especially get too dogmatic about which of these interpretations is right. So I had a challenge looking at this. Not only is it very difficult to understand interpretation-wise, but I had a challenge of what do I bring to you that could be helpful? And I think I found something that could be remarkably helpful to all of us coming out of this passage. But in order to get there, I need you to come with me on a walking tour. So let's kind of walk out of Ezekiel for a moment, and we're going to take a walking tour. It's going to be an architectural appreciation walking tour. It won't last very long. We're just going to go to 3 different sites. But I want you to come with me, and I'm going to show you something. And the first place that we're going to go is Dockland. It's a waterfront market area in Dublin, Ireland. And when we walk there, we're going to see that there's a cube, a black cube, glassy, black, glossy cube that's 4.2 by 4.2 by 4.2 meters. And this is an art installation. It's intended to send a message. The black, glossy glass is intended to represent fossil fuel, or more specifically, crude oil. And the mirrored periscope that you get to look at inside of it that will reveal the sky and make it look like it's just massive, the sky above you, is intended to send the message of renewable energy. The roof of the cube is made of solar panels to light, and the 5 sides of this, 4.2 by 4.2 by 4.2, are intended to represent the amount of crude oil. This is how much crude oil is used in this relatively small island every 5 minutes. And so the message in the architecture is, in one day, the equivalents of 288 of these cubes of crude oil are consumed, but unlimited renewable energy is all around us. There's a message in the architecture. Now, come with me. We're going to leave Ireland, and we're going to go over to China. And we're going to go to the Guangzhou Opera House in China. It's built to look like 2 rocks that had been weathered and worn down over centuries from the Pearl River just off to the side, have been plucked out and put on the shore. And if you walk inside, there's this reinforced fiberglass that's all wavy inside. And the intention is that as you walk in here, you would get the sense that you're in sort of this silky place that's wavy and movie. In fact, the feel would be that you've walked into the very sound waves coming off of the stage. And the architects of this said that they wanted people to experience a spectacle within a spectacle, a visual and acoustic experience that they become a part of as a triumph of harmony. And there's a message in the architecture. And the message is this: this experience isn't complete without you. We want to invite you to come be part of the opera experience, sitting and walking amongst the sound waves of this remarkable place. Now, we have one more stop on our walking tour of architectural appreciation. It's actually a little bit closer to home. We're just going to walk over to the Human Rights Museum here in Winnipeg at the Forks, with its 1,669 individual custom-cut panes of glass. None of them are the same as the other. And as you begin to walk through this tour, you're going to go down into the depths of the building. You're going to go down into the darkness. You're going to descend into the lower dark regions of human rights, and you're going to then journey from darkness to light, climbing to the top of the Tower of Hope that appears to be unfinished because the work and the issue of human rights will never be finished. It will never end. And the message in the architecture of our own Human Rights Museum is human rights issues will lead you into some very dark places. But we should never stop climbing to the mountain of human rights, though the journey will remain unfinished as we pursue the light. Now, I could go on showing you building after building after building. I had too much fun looking into this because it seems like every building has a message, a subtle, hidden message in it that the architects wanted to communicate. And the message of Ezekiel's temple is no different. I believe there are some profound messages that we find in the architecture of the temple. And so I want to continue by giving you the messages coming from the architecture of these 9 chapters in the temple. And here's the first one. This life with God, it's bigger than you think. This life with God is bigger than you think. Looking at Jerusalem and the Temple Mount today, it's a very, very small area where the Dome of the Rock is. And if you go there again, it's not a very big area at all. Looking at a map of Jerusalem itself, it's just a little speck on the map. However, if you take the dimensions that are given to us in this vision and you begin to draw them out, what you find is a much larger area. This is what it looks like here. The white square around the little dot is the actual temple, and then the red is the set-apart holy area. And it's like 56 kilometers by close to the same. I mean, it's amazing. Anybody hearing Ezekiel's vision and actually taking a pencil and beginning to draw it out, their jaw would have just dropped. Like, I can't believe how massive this is. This thing is huge. I mean, compared to anything they had ever dreamt of, anything they had ever seen. And I believe that there is a message in the architecture, and the message is this: a life with God is so much bigger than you could ever imagine. Now, in case you think I'm making that up, let me take you to one of my all-time favorite verses in 2 Corinthians in the New Testament. Listen to what Paul says to the Corinthians, but I'm going to insert Riverwood in there, okay? Because this is for us. Listen to this. Dear Riverwooders. Dear Riverwooders at the warehouse, at the fire hall, wherever you are on vacation right now, wherever you are on a work trip, dear Riverwooders right here at the factory, listen up. I can't tell you how much I long, Paul says, for you to enter this wide open, spacious life. Listen, we didn't fence you in. The smallness you feel comes from within you. Your lives aren't small, but you're living them in a small way. I'm speaking as plainly as I can and with great affection. Open up your lives. Live openly and expansively. I love that. The architecture of the temple is designed to send this message that says from God to you, listen, I am so much bigger than anything you could ever imagine. Don't go thinking this is a small venture that you're on. You're on a massive venture. There is so much more that you don't even know about. I'm calling you to live your life large. But many of us aren't living large. We're living small. The problem is that we're living small because of our problems and struggles and circumstances. But this message of the temple is, listen, I am so much bigger than your problems. I'm so much bigger than your struggles. I'm so much bigger than your worries or your fears. I never called you to live a small life. So listen, join me in living a big life. Well, that's just message number one out of the architecture. Message number two is this. This life with God is more inclusive than you think. Now, anybody back in Ezekiel's time of drawing out these actual drawings would have saw something that, again, would have made their jaw drop. There was no court of the Gentiles, and there was no court of the women. This was shocking because everybody 2,500 years ago in Judaism would have understood that Gentiles and women had to have their own special court. They were not allowed into the holiest places. But there's a message in the architecture. And the message in the architecture is that this is far more inclusive. In fact, again, we read this in the New Testament. We read this in Galatians 3:28. There is no longer Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. You are not allowed into God's presence based on your gender, on your status, on your title, on your nationality, on your religious upbringing, on what church you went to, but rather you are welcomed in to God's presence based on your faith and relationship with Jesus Christ. But there's a third message in the architecture, and it's this. This life with God, it's a call to organize your life around God. The architecture, as you draw it out, it goes in concentric circles, bigger and bigger and bigger, until it's like 56 kilometers wide of holiness. And it's all about what's happening in the center, in the very center. And the message in the architecture is your life needs to revolve around God. God needs to be the center of your life, and you need to organize or reorganize your life around God. Strategically, intentionally ordering your life with God in the center. When you have a chance of your preferences or God's preferences, because God is the center of your life, you choose God's preferences. When you have a chance to obey God's word or disobey God's word and ignore it, you rearrange your life and you obey God's word because God is in the center of your life. And somebody who gives great testimony to this was last weekend at baptism was Kristen.
Hi, my name is Kristen Kewick, and I attend the 11:15 service at the warehouse. It's interesting because I grew up in the faith. I was born in a Christian home, attended catechism classes, and I think even though I had a strong faith, I was probably more a head knowledge than in the heart. So I left the church when I was 18 years old with my dad and my brother, and attended another church that I would say was a lot less conservative, but still along the conservative strain. And I feel like my faith kind of became a progression after that. I went to another church that was a little less conservative yet. And then about 6 years ago, I ended up at Riverwood. And I think that's when I truly came to finding like full freedom in Christ and what that actually meant. And just, I don't really fear anything. I mean, there are certain things in life, I think, where you would want things to go a certain way. You would write the script a certain way. But when you look back on life, you realize like, oh man, I would have messed that up pretty badly, and I'm glad that God worked it all out. And looking back on those times, you're just really happy that He's in control and that I'm not in control. And so just having a total sense of contentment and just no worry, no fear. It's just, a really peaceful way of living. I am being baptized today because Jesus commands us to be baptized. I was baptized as a baby in the church that I grew up in, and I believe that my parents believed that they were doing what God was calling them to do. It wasn't a choice of mine, and it was more of a public profession for them to say, hey, we're going to raise our daughter in the faith, and they did that, and I'm extremely grateful for that. For a while, I was confused as to whether or not I needed to be baptized again because I was baptized as a baby, and then reading through the verses, verse after verse, it was just pretty simple. Like, it was something along the lines of, they heard the message, they believed, and they were baptized. And it was super simple. And after reading all those verses, I kind of felt like, why have I waited so long? It really doesn't have to be complicated. If you believe that Jesus is the Son of God and you want to live your life for him, then it's pretty simple. You need to be baptized.
Yeah, we celebrate with you, Kristen. Thank you for sharing that story. But I love the ending of that. You know, I read the word. It said, this is what I'm supposed to do. So I took my life and I made sure that I organized it around what God said, and I rearranged how I was living, and I obeyed him. And that's the kind of practicality that is a message in this architecture. Organize your life around God. The next message, the fourth message, is this life with God. It's about bringing what is dead to life. There's this amazing picture in chapter 47 that we read yesterday. And the picture is of this little stream that comes out from the altar and from the temple area, and it runs out past the wall. And so the guide in this vision takes Ezekiel, and they go around the wall, and they see this little stream. And he notes that they walked about a half a kilometer, and then it was about ankle deep. Kind of, you can imagine walking through it, just ankle deep. They walked about a half a kilometer further, and it was getting to be knee-waist deep. And they walked another half a kilometer further, and it's starting to get like up near the shoulders. And then it gets to the point where you can no longer walk through it, and you're swimming in it. But then the guide takes Ezekiel to the edge of the valley and says, I want you to tell me what you see. And we pick up this story right here in chapter 47, verse 6. Son of man, have you ever seen anything like this? Then my guide brought me back to the river's edge. When we got back there, I saw and looked and saw orchards all along both sides of the river. This river flows eastward and runs down into the Jordan Valley to the place where it flows into the Dead Sea. The moment it meets the sea, the salty water becomes fresh. Swarms of creatures will flourish within this river as it flows. Schools of fish will swim through the currents of fresh water, for wherever this water flows, everything will come alive. Fishermen will stand upon the shores and spread out their nets. They will come there because the waters contain many fish of various kinds. This is what the Dead Sea looks like today. Again, if you come with us, if you've ever been to Israel, you get to go to the Dead Sea. It's a remarkable place. It's an awesome place you don't go swimming, you go floating because of the chemicals and the minerals in there. But I can tell you that it stinks. It stinks, and it's shrinking, and it stings. If you get the water on your lips or in your mouth or in your eyes, there's a stinging sensation that happens, and nothing can live in or near this water. Everything around is dead. For miles and miles and miles is dead. And the message in the architecture is this: from God's temple, when God is at the center of your life, flow ever-deepening healing waters. And if you are in need of restoration or resurrection, something in your life needs to be resurrected or brought back to life, you have come to the right place. Because this is the place where the healing waters flow. This isn't a message just for the exiled people of Israel that are living in Babylon. This is a message for us today. Because looking at that picture, how many of us would say, you know what? That kind of reminds me of my life. I'm kind of standing in a barren place. I kind of feel like my soul has been sun-scorched, and I'm kind of dried up, and I'm kind of withering, and I'm kind of shrinking in my life, and there's not a lot of life right now. There's not a lot of flourishing right now. How many of us would say, you know what, I'm sort of camped out beside some pretty stinky waters right now, and I could really use something more than this. And what this message is listen, follow the flow of God. Follow God's flow. Ankle deep, knee deep, waist deep. Keep going, don't give up, don't stop, keep going, because when you do, it's going to lead you to those places that were dead, and it's going to bring new life. It's going to bring new life. It's going to be flourishing. It's going to be something you don't even recognize anymore because the power of God is flourishing there. In other words, you'll be swimming in a miracle. And that's a message in the architecture. Do I believe in miracles? You bet I do. Do I think that God still does miracles? You bet I do. God is still in the business of doing miracles. But too many of us are living, not even following the river to the ankle deep stuff. We're leaning up against the temple wall. We're just sort of sitting there, not going anywhere with God. And this message in the architecture is follow where God is going and adventure with him. The fifth message in the architecture of the temple is this life with God, it's all about holiness. It's all about holiness. In fact, we read this in Ezekiel 43. And this is the basic law of the temple, absolute holiness. The entire top of the mountain where the temple is built on is holy. Yes, this is the basic law of the temple. The ancient word there in Hebrew for holiness is kadesh. And I love the word kadesh because it's very simple to understand. The word kadesh is simply this. It's take what you have in your life and create an apartness, a set apartness, a separated part. Set it apart for God. So it's a profound picture of what we're to do. We're to take what is in our life and we're to set it apart. However, God has issue with the people because just before this, he says, here's what you're doing instead. He says, these people, they put their idol altars right next to mine with only a wall between them and me. They defile my holy name by such detestable sin, so I consume them with my anger. What an incredible picture. God says, look I left the temple, I left you people, I left you and I punished you, but I'm back now. I'm back. I didn't want to punish you, but I want you to have a deep, intimate relationship with me. So I'm back here. Here I am in your life. And what are you doing? You're taking your useless, plastic, wooden, carved, human-made idols and you're worshiping them right next to me. There's just a little wall separating the two of us. And you think that I can be in your life while you worship these idols. It's an incredible picture. And I think that, it's not just a picture for Israel, it's a picture for us. I mean, how many of us have an idol in our life that we're just sort of leaning up against our souls, and it really has nothing to do with God? You see, there's supposed to be an apartness to us. The way we talk, the words we use. It's supposed to sound different than the rest of the world because it's set apart for God. The entertainment we watch, the things we expose ourselves to on our phones and our iPads and our laptops and our computers and our TVs, there's supposed to be a difference than the rest of the world. There's supposed to be an apartness to that. Our marriages, they're not supposed to look like every other marriage in the world. There's supposed to be a sacred apartness to that. Our sexuality, it's supposed to be different than the world's. It's supposed to be an apartness set aside for God. We're going to talk about that at the Ascent for young adults tonight, and we're going to go a little bit deeper with that. The way we use our money, the thoughts that we have, there's supposed to be this apartness. Does holiness still matter? The message in the architecture of the temple is that holiness still matters. Sacredness still matters. And God is still calling us to set our lives apart for him. Last message in the architecture of the temple is this life with God, it's all about presence. I love the last verse of Ezekiel chapter 48, not only because it indicates we're done with Ezekiel, but because it's a great climactic verse. Listen to this. This distance around the entire city will be about 6 miles. And from that day, the name of the city will be Yahweh Shema. The Lord is there. The Lord is present. I can't think of a more redemptive, more hope-filled, more reassuring picture than this. On the blueprints of the temple that God had Ezekiel draw out are written a new name. Jerusalem is crossed out, and it's now called Yahweh Shema. The Lord is present. The Lord is here. The message in the architecture is that God isn't uncaring, that God isn't distant. God hasn't abandoned you. God isn't unreachable. The message in the architecture is that God is right here. He's right here. Is he holy? Yes. Is he bigger than you could ever imagine? Yes. Is he powerful? Yes. Is he greater than you could comprehend? Yes. But he's also right here. And he is your best friend who wants to walk through life with you, as my friend Joel is about to tell us.
My name is Joe of Bayside. Yeah, I like to watch Christian movies, and I like to read the Bible, and I like to listen to the music. I want to talk about my friend. His name is Jesus. He is my friend. So this is Jesus. He hanged on the cross. He is letting them to kill him because he wants to love your enemies. And that's how that God raised Jesus to life again. That's where he's alive. And then and this is the tomb. This the light is flashing around the whole tomb, and then Jesus came out of the tomb all by himself. And there's the angel came, right, sitting on the stone. So this is the baptism. That's where John baptized Jesus. And there's a dove came, and when after he got baptized. And there's a voice came from the sky and said, "This is my beloved son. I am well pleased." I want to get baptized because I want to decide to follow Jesus because I love him.
Wow. Thank you, Joel. Yeah, thanks, Joel, for sharing that with us. You know, every time I see Joel share his story like that, I think, oh my goodness, he understands. He probably has a better grasp of the gospel and the message of God than most of us do. I want to talk to you about my friend. His name is Jesus, and I love him. Yahweh Shema. God is present. Oh, listen, don't go putting your idols leaning up against the wall. There's no place for that. Live a life that is set apart and different than the rest of the world. Yes, allow there to be elements of your life that are holy. Realize that this life with God is way bigger than you could ever imagine. And you are being invited to go wading and swimming in the waters of his healing to restore what was dead. It's an incredible invitation. So while it's the most difficult and most confusing passage of Scripture to understand, today I'm kind of walking away going, it might be the most inspiring passage because there's a message in the architecture if we'll just pay attention. At all of our sites right now, we're going to take a few moments to respond with worship. And so God bless you guys. Have a great rest of your week.